Welcome back to Woman, Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda. We are picking sensitive topics that are on our hearts and our minds, talking about them across racial lines, and hopefully educating our listeners to some different perceptions that they may not have been acquainted with, and also encouraging you to have these sensitive conversations too. We have both learned a lot through these conversations, and it feels like a safe space to both of us to talk with each other, and we're sharing that safe space with you. Perhaps you can create your own. So today's topic is a little bit of history, but woven into what it is, to how it intersects with current events. It's amazing how often history intersects with current events. Bernadette, you're always the one to introduce.
You know how they always say, if you want to know where you're going, look where you've come from. And so, man, if we just turn around and see what we've been through, because it is truly a cycle that we are in right now. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Truly a cycle.
So today's topic, I'm going to take us through a little bit of the history of the community, the small city of Wilmington, Delaware, in the late 1800s, mind you, and how that relates to what is currently called white women's tears and the impact that has on racial, what would we call it? Racial brutality, racial
terror,
right? Racial terror.
Mm-hmm.
So white women's tears in Wilmington, Delaware community. So I wouldn't get dates and stuff tangled up, I looked this all up. There's more. It would make a couple of wonderful movies, actually. But Wilmington, Delaware was a population of about 10,000, of which a majority was Black. And they had a very progressive white community, a rising middle class, prosperous Black people in the late 1890s. And it got to where the city council was majority Black. And they actually had a political party called Fusion, which is interesting when you think about it. It consisted of the more progressive whites and the poor whites. At that time, Black people and poor white people were bonded together. Now that has since been split apart by and large by political rhetoric. Not always true, as you may know, but at that time in this community, that's the people who made up a particular party called the Fusion Party. And there were a number of elected officials in the city government. There was also white women, which is where our story starts. I am a white woman, and it's kind of horrifying to think the power that white women have had to cause racial terror over the centuries. So this is one particular story, but keep in mind, this is not an isolated incident. There are other stories up to current times and other situations in history that have equal ramifications of white women reacting. So here's the story. A woman named Rebecca Latimer Felton was a prominent suffragist, and she was married to a wealthy man in Wilmington. He was not part of this Fusion Party, and she was a speaker, probably because she was a suffragist. She was working for women's voting rights, but
white women,
only white women's vote. She did not want Black people to vote. So she gave a fiery and probably eloquent speech about the Black rapist. That's what she called it, and the failures of white men to protect their women. Well, now things were already a little touchy around there because you had a ruling class that was a mixture of Blacks and more progressive whites, and they were actually doing very well. That was a successful, dynamic, thriving community. But you had a disgruntled set of essentially white supremacists. That's what they were. And even though one of them happened to be a women's suffrage movement, she was not, or women's suffrage advocate, she was not in favor of universal suffrage, only women's suffrage, white women's suffrage. So into this was the summer of 1898. In about August, I think, was when she gave this speech. It was probably titled The Black Rapist. And she took to task white men for not protecting their women from Black rapists. Well, following that, as we know from other history, people cannot do damage and kill and go to war against other human beings. So we have to dehumanize the ones we consider to be enemies. There's whole books about this. It's called Faces of the Enemy by Sam Kean. At any rate, so what the cartoonists of that time did was they started making demon pictures of the Black rapist. He was huge. He had devil horns and huge shoulders, and he was coming to get their white women. Well, that added fuel to the fire and kept stirring things up. And I'm sure she continued to speak on this topic. In the midst of this, whether it was a wise or a foolish thing remains for history to decide, but there was a biracial newspaper editor named Alexander Manly, M-A-N-L-Y. And he published with his brother a paper called The Daily Record. Now, I am only hitting the high points. There's so much behind all this. There was already this culture of unsettledness, but these are some of the matches that got thrown into this unsettled pool of flammable liquid. He wrote an editorial following her speech called The Black Rapist, and he refuted it in a rather fiery manner of his own. And he said very clearly that consensual sex between white women and Black men did exist. The background for this is that he was the son of two biracial parents, a father that was European and African, and a mother that was a freed slave, but had white blood too. However that happened, we don't know. You'd have to go further back. But at any rate, he was biracial. He is technically Negro by the standards of that day, but when you see his picture, he looks more white than, so he was biracial. And his evidence for all that would have been that he had seen this in his family. He had seen biracial relationships where a white woman loved a Black man and it was truly consensual. Well, that didn't land very well. And his friends and family said, you shouldn't publish this. This will cause terrible damage. You can't publish this into this atmosphere. But he was a stubborn man and a good writer, and he chose to publish it anyway. What happened, and I don't know the exact timing of his publication of this, and you can still find it labeled The Riot, but it was actually a massacre. White people went after Black people with guns. So what happened on the date was November 10th of 1898. And what happened on that day was the white supremacist group got riled up enough that they took guns, and the brothers who ran the newspaper escaped to Washington, D.C. Some people escaped. There were 60, like these things, they don't know the numbers because who cared at the moment? They literally burned down and damaged and destroyed the newspaper office of the Daily Record, and they killed somewhere between 60 and 300 Black people, and the rest they terrorized so much that over 2,000 Black people in that community left and went elsewhere, which means they left their property behind too. They burned and destroyed several things, and then this group, I don't know in what order, but this little group of white supremacists took over the city government. They literally went to the city offices. I don't know whether they killed those people or chased them out, but they said, you're no longer running this town. And they said it's the only coup that has ever been successful on US soil. And so they literally by force with guns took over the city government of Wilmington, Delaware on November 10th, 1898. Now, there were a lot of factors that went into this, so I'm giving you like a Cliff's Notes version of an amazingly complex story. But what we're going to tie together here today is we use the term, Bernadette and I, and it's in the press, white women's tears. If you're doing any sort of racial reading or racial work, you're going to see this. It's the ability of white women to say, oh, poor me, I'm so violated. I'm so scared. I'm so violated. You have to save me, big white man. And then the white man in response will take guns or words or whatever and go do violence to Black men to appease the pleas of their women. This is white women's tears. And if you're in a working environment, I think Bernadette would testify that sometimes in working environments, white women get emotional, like, oh, I feel picked on. This Black woman said certain things are going on at work and I feel so picked on. And that's white women's tears in probably a more work environment. But white women's tears are one of the playing cards in eliminating the move or eliminating further work towards racial justice. And we need to see that for what it is. And Bernadette, you and I were coming up. I went deeper into this one story rather than collecting all the names, but we know that the Tulsa massacre, Greenwood massacre was started by a white woman who said this young boy, I think he was 15 or so, touched her in the elevator or something.
It was in the newspaper. It was actually printed. He got familiar.
He got familiar in an elevator. And Emmett Till was, his death was triggered by men who responded to a woman who eventually on her deathbed recanted and said none of that happened, the things that I said. But of course, Emmett Till was brutally murdered at a young age. How old was he?
He was 14. He was 14.
And these are only little examples. This is why when somebody like Amy Cooper in Central Park calls the police on a Black man who was there to birdwatch and says, he's threatening my life, or some version of that, it's like, this is viewed very badly by the community that's working towards racial justice.
Well, she didn't just say he's threatening his life. She said, I am scared there is a big Black man. She specifically said those words because she knew what to say to get the response that she was after.
Right. I'm scared there's a big Black man. How
there's a big Black man.
Is that to Rachel, Rebecca Latimer Felton's words? There's a Black rapist who's threatening all of us pure white women, and our men aren't protecting us like they should be. So this is a phenomenon that has been happening for, how long is that? Probably 200 years at least, maybe before that. And it is still happening, maybe in more, it's happening now with cell phones and in professional settings and with words, but it's still there. And we need to be really savvy to that. We can't afford to close our eyes to that phenomenon happening. And I don't know, go ahead if you have anything further to say. That's my history for today, but there may be other comments.
You and I have had these conversations, off camera. White women's tears is one of the most weaponized tools that white supremacists have to use. White women have been given the powerful ability to be the offender, yet shedding a tear allows for the entire situation to then be catered to them because the offender has now turned into the victim. It is an incredibly long-standing form of terror that white women have been granted the ability to use for centuries, literally for centuries. And it is infuriating, it is exhausting, but it is still very real and present and happens in every, I don't know that there's an arena that it is not used, some more consciously than others, but it is a response that society has been trained to come to. How can we get the white woman to stop crying? And whether that means we need to slaughter an entire community, then so be it. What do we have to do to get the white woman to stop crying? It is there is no parallel or no equal to that in society. There literally isn't.
Right. I would agree with you. There's nothing to compare it to. It's a phenomenon that stands on its own.
Yes.
And we're not going to go into the whys and wherefores, but it is something that we're not the ones who originated the names. The name is out there. You can look for it, and there's going to be other people who've been talking about this, but we want to bring some attention to that and name it for when it is happening and when we see it.
And it is a tool of white supremacy. Let us be clear. It is a tool to keep white supremacy.
Right. And it may get hidden under my feelings got hurt, or I was scared. It may get hidden under those levels, but it's very real. It's, you're saying it's a phenomenon that's been weaponized as a tool for white supremacy, right?
Because, and I don't, like we both said, it's centuries standing, but everyone has bought into, many people have bought into the notion that white women should not be uncomfortable or be sad or be held accountable or called out on something that is blatantly wrong. Because if there's anything that upsets her equilibrium, then we need to hurry up and fix it right now, because supposedly she's this fragile being, when in all reality, some are very aware of when to use it and how to use it, and they use it at will and at random. And we got to be honest about what that is. We've got to be honest about what that is.
We do. We absolutely have to be honest. And if you look at Rebecca Latimer Felton, she knew exactly what she was doing. Now we can only guess at why. Maybe she felt strongly that Black people should not have the vote and they were getting too powerful in her community. But whatever it was, she put a hook in it by saying, our white men are failing to protect us from the Black rapist. That's what she said. And that stirred the pot. And within a short time, there was a backlash and then the massacre. And so.
And it has happened time and time. And Wilmington wasn't the only place that happened.
No.
That happened in Oklahoma, that happened in Florida. And so it has literally been typically one white woman that has undone entire work of communities of hundreds of people in one fell swoop.
Right.
Literally in one fell swoop.
Right. And we don't have statistics on that, but yes, we know about Wilmington. I mean, when you read the history of what Wilmington was like before that episode, it's amazing.
Or Greenwood, Oklahoma. It was a self-contained community, 36 square blocks. You had Black millionaires. I mean, they had Bowling Alley School, completely self-contained community. They were slaughtered. 300 people slaughtered. The police gave white men guns to go kill people, and then they followed them and assisted. Slaughtered because one white woman. And then they took the land and moved on from there. So not only were people, and then they assumed possession of the land.
Oh yeah, right. In other words,
and went on from there, just like happened in Wilmington, Delaware. So not only were lives lost, but the ability to pass on generational wealth was lost. I mean, from one white woman, literally.
Right.
One white woman.
As the trigger. Men were, I mean, who knows? Men were sitting around waiting for something to justify their ire, and she gave it to them.
And she gave it to them.
Right.
Yes.
So it's like we need to be able to see these things and call them for what they are, and recognize what's happening, whether it's in small ways or big ways. I'm going to make a little sideline here, because I know that there are many white women and Black women working together in various situations. And I know from reading that now I am a white woman who's done a lot of personal growth work that has nothing particularly to do with racism. So there's times that I feel tears. I need to cry. It's an important part. So white women's tears as a weapon of white supremacy is different than just ordinary tears. But because it's been used like that, it's almost like a toy gun, but it's not a toy. And it's like, if I feel tears, but I'm in a racially mixed situation, I will leave. I will take myself out of there and go do what I have to do, because I will not use my tears in sitting situations where it could be interpreted as a tool to keep something from happening, to keep something from unfolding. And if you're in racially mixed situations and you're white and you feel emotion, keep all this in mind, and maybe if possible, just excuse yourself for a moment if you can't hold it back. Now, if you have other advice, that's fine. That's my advice from where I am. Just remember that this, I'm sorry, I bumped my stand there. Remember that this has been used as a weapon, and many people have died. Innocent people have died in massacres that are just as evil as the My Lai massacre, which eventually somebody was brought to justice for. But these are things that are decades and decades old, and there's no justice. And what we need to do is stop it from happening and then start looking forward. But we need to see what's happened in the past.
So I have a few things to say to that. One, thank you for saying that. I think white women should get up and leave, because here's what happens. Even if you're not trying to use it as a tool of white supremacy, the minute a white woman starts crying, whatever the conversation was, regardless of how important it was, you have now diverted all the attention and all the energy in the room to you. So whatever was going on, that has ceased, and it has all been shifted to you. So you, and not even if you're trying to do it on purpose, have now focused everyone's energy and attention on you. And that is, I think that is not only unfair, that is also disparaging. And it does not allow for forward movement to happen, because everyone wants to see what we can do to get her to be okay. So I appreciate you saying, if you're feeling emotional, get up and leave. Get up and leave.
There's restrooms. There's restrooms. There's and
go do what you got to do.
You know, that's another whole topic. But if a man were to feel emotional in a business meeting session, he would block it, because people would try to ignore it if a man felt emotional. If a white woman feels emotional, whole bunches of people are going to try to acknowledge and fix it. And I don't even know what a group would do if a Black woman felt emotional and showed it in a professional setting like that. I mean, do you have any idea, Bernadette?
Black women typically aren't allowed. Black women are not allowed the permission to display vulnerabilities like that. We are always seen as angry. So our tears have never compared to the tears of white women. So even if a Black woman probably was in a realm and she was crying, it would probably be treated like a man's and ignored. It wouldn't even be acknowledged.
And none of that's what we would say is healthy dynamics. We are just talking to what is. We're trying to say what is. Emotions are not unhealthy, but we all have to choose where we express them. And we have to understand, as white women and Black women and people in mixed situations, we have to understand how this comes across to the whole group. So we're dealing with our own inner being, and we're dealing with a group dynamic that has been used for very bad reasons in the past. And we have to not allow that to go further. So a very polar opposite experience, as to where when a white woman cries out, for some reason, everyone is responsible for helping her get herself together. As to where if a Black woman cries, I don't know what her problem is. It is literally the exact polar opposite. I've heard people say, I don't know what her problem is. I mean,
what's wrong with her?
Exactly. Exactly. So.
And so it is as a Black woman who has been in many different realms, it infuriates me sometimes to no end, because the minute they shed a tear, we are now all responsible for making you feel better. That is, it is infuriating and it is exhausting, but it has happened for centuries. But the twist to this is, so here is where I am with that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, one of the latest victims of a police brutality, Dante Wright, his mother is white. So I am curious to see how this will play out, because when America sees white women crying, there's this visceral response of we've got to do something because a white woman is crying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am very curious to see how this plays out, because his mother is white and we are not comfortable when white women are crying.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, so pay
Yeah,
attention to that, because this is a different dynamic. We got no problem seeing black women cry, black mothers, but yeah, whatever. We've been seeing that for centuries. But let a white woman cry. So this is different.
Right. Wow. Yep, I actually know a number of white women that are mothers to black sons. I know quite a few, really, given everything. So well, all right. So I think we've added our little tips that we sometimes throw in there. And anything else you want to say on this topic, Bernadette?
I will want to say this. So at the top of the conversation, Linda talked about how this is a safe place for us to talk. I want people to understand that a safe place does not necessarily correlate to a comfortable place. Being safe and being comfortable are two different constructs. Linda and I feel incredibly safe with each other, but all these conversations are equally as uncomfortable for both of us. So I don't want people to think if I don't feel comfortable, then it must not mean it's safe. No, that is not the case. Yeah, this is uncomfortable work. It's necessary work. But the more comfortable we get with being uncomfortable, the less uncomfortable these conversations will become.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I do work on stage as a singer. I've been a teacher. I give speeches now and then. And those never get completely comfortable, like I'm sitting here watching a movie on TV. Right. But I do get to where I'm comfortable with that level of tension. And I'm approaching that with our conversations, Bernadette. So we are, we know that there's some tension involved because they're hard topics.
Yes.
And there's all kinds of feelings that are there. And normally we don't cry on camera, though we wouldn't rule it out if those things happened. And we just feel that this is important information. We are learning as we talk to each other, but we're sharing this so that our listeners and viewers can learn as well. And you may never be blessed with the opportunity to have all these conversations on all these difficult topics with a friend, but we are, and we're sharing them. So
yeah, and so I'm glad that you said that, because comfort and safety are not the same.
They're not the same
by any means. Yeah.
She knows that I'm not going to jump down her throat or dismiss her experience, and I know that she's not going to do the same to me either.
Right.
And we agree on a whole lot of things. I mean, if there's areas we disagree on, we just let it be that we disagree, but we agree on a lot, and we established that before we started recording. So
yeah.
Okay.
Well, this was one.
This was fun, right?
This was a heavy one. This was a heavy one, but I'm glad you chose this, and I'm glad you chose to lead the conversation on that one, because it's not one that people call out for what it is. So thank you for calling it out for what it truly is, so people can pay more attention. Yeah, pay more attention. So we are on YouTube, Facebook, Woman to Woman Conversations in Black and White. So please send us messages, join the conversation. We love things of this nation. Start talking, keep talking, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.